Hello, good morning. It's been a hot minute since I've spoken to you about any of the books that I've read. It has been far too long, about 3 months. Positives for this is that I haven't actually read that much, so this is not going to be a long-winded video. Hi, my name is Michaela, this is meekela Reads, and I'm going to tell you about the books that I've read basically since March this year. If you can hear my bird, he is contact calling me because he can hear me but not see me. Disclaimer number 1, we're digging far into the archives of the brain right now. We've got to dig into the filing cabinets to actually draw out thoughts, feelings, and opinions because it has been quite some time, and due to the nature of the last several months, I just haven't documented anything in terms of my thoughts of books, what I've done. It's been a blank 3 months. There's been nothing, just head empty, no thoughts. Second disclaimer, I'm not a professional book reviewer. I do this for fun, so bear with me while I gather my thoughts. There is no third disclaimer, so let's begin. So to start with, we read a series, and I'm going to roll all of these into one because it's just going to be so much easier to coordinate rather than when I read them, as I usually do. I read the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy. In the last wrap-up video that I did, I had read all 3 of the first 3. I officially finished the 4th one in March, and this is the goal. This is the 4th and final full installment in the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy. It is a hockey romance series. It centers on 4 guys that live together who are on the hockey team and their respective romances with the girls, basically. In the 4th one, we follow Tuck and Serena, and as it is the 4th book, both of these characters feature somewhat heavily in the first 3 books, and actually the events of this book kind of happen more towards the end of book 3, and then we actually get a bit of a reveal at the end of book 3 about what's going on in book 4. So if you haven't read book 3, you haven't read book 4, here's a minor spoiler. I will wave my hands like this when we're done. This one is centered on a pregnancy trope, which I don't typically like. I've never been a fan of a pregnancy trope, but this one hit me in a weird, different way that I was not expecting. And I think the reason I liked it so much is because it was so different to the other 3 books in the series that all kind of had similar peaks and dips in the arcs. But because obviously pregnancy trope is quite different, very different vibes, very interesting. I think it had me in such a grip because this one, the pregnancy trope bit, actually wasn't solely focused on that. It was actually more so around Serena and Tuck's relationship. Serena, oh my god. Have I been saying Serena? It primarily focuses on her struggles in her life, and Tuck is actually also just more in the background than anything. We're done with the spoilers. All of these books, particularly this part of the series, is so good for just brain dead entertainment. Like, it doesn't take a lot to read it. My brain can somewhat switch off. I know the world. It is a romance, so you kind of expect what's going to happen. And if I'm going to be honest, that is exactly what I need right now, because executive function is not computing. Particularly back in May, it is now May, back in March when I read it. The 3rd one in the series does remain my favorite, but this one is a standout as being just a bit different. My follow-up for that, I actually read The Legacy, which is essentially like a novella collection for the 4 stories. There's 4 novellas in it. They each follow one of the couples from the first 4 books, and they happen somewhat sequentially, a couple of years after the last book, I'm pretty sure. As I said, they follow each of the couples, but they do intertwine and sort of weave together throughout, much like the series did, but just in more of a cohesive way, because all of the plot points and the overarching story kind of happens across the 4. Definitely have to read them in order if you're going to read them, because it would not make sense otherwise. I won't reveal the actual content of the stories because, you know, spoilers, but I will say that it did play out in a very natural way that is expected of those relationships and their trajectories. Also, if you're going to read them, potentially maybe read the Briar ones first if you're going to read those, because I was planning on reading those. I still am, but characters from that also pop up in The Legacy. Not as much as I thought they might have, but they definitely were there, and I did have to skim over those sections so they weren't spoils. I may have burnt myself out with a 5th hockey romance in a row, because it did take me a hot minute to actually get through this one. The stories themselves weren't too long, but I guess the jumping between the different characters was a bit jarring, and it didn't flow like the rest of the books did. Nature of novellas, it's not a flaw, it just is. As well, probably because I don't have hands, hang on. The romance of it has already happened in the other 4 books, so there wasn't like that slow build burn that I was probably a bit more invested in. But all in all, it was average. It was a nice read. It was a nice way to kind of round out the stories of these characters too, because they weren't necessarily left unfinished in the original books, but it was nice to just sort of see where things ended up. Next, we took a bit of a left turn and we ventured into the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Once again, I'm going to talk about them all three in one because my brain has a really hard time separating the events of each book from each other. The reasoning for that is because I listened to them. This is the Mistborn trilogy, the Mistborn series. There is more than 4 books. Bear with me. It is comprised of the Final Empire, the Well of Ascension, and the Hero of Ages. It is a highly well-acclaimed series. Everyone who I know has read it has really, really enjoyed it, including my partner, who doesn't like reading. Over the course of the 3 books, we follow a cast of characters, and this is set in a world in which the sun is red. There are mysterious mists that appear at nighttime, nefarious various creatures who prowl the mists, who exist in this world. The magic system is so unique. Unique in a way that it's popular and everyone knows about it, but it's unique. It is based in metals, and the principle of it is that people have the capacity to ingest metals and then burn them to use their powers. They manifest as various different things like extra strength, being able to push metals, pull metals, all that jazz. And these people are called allomancers. Typically people in this world only can do one of those things, but if you can do more than one, it means that you can do all of them, and then therefore you are a Mistborn, hence the title. In the first one, and also the whole series, but the first one, we'll start there. We follow a ragtag group of allomancers led by Kelsier, who is, spoiler alert, a Mistborn. They are essentially fighting to rebel and overthrow the Final Empire, which is led by their king. His name is the Lord Ruler. He is essentially the god. He is so powerful, he has all of the powers, controls everything, made everything, he is God. They're trying to overthrow God. This is like a heist style plan, which I think is why I liked it so much, because I really enjoy heist novels. And then hijinks ensue. That's essentially the plot of the first book. However, I will give away no more information, but the second and third books do tend to bring up more questions and only answer some of the questions that you had in the first book, because you leave the first book with more questions than you had answered. I very, very much enjoyed this series. Very, very much. I just don't think that I enjoyed it as much as everyone else seems to. Now, hear me out. Hear me out. I did listen to them mid-book slump, mid-book exhaustion. I also read them primarily because I gave them to Jared to read, and he then told me that I had to read them. So, not necessarily the mood read that I was in the mood for reading. Also, listening does tend to divert my attention a bit, and particularly with fantasy series, I do find that I really, really struggle to actually imagine the world. And as good as Brandon Sanderson's writing is, particularly with building a world and making you feel like you are there and you can actually see all of the things happening like a little movie in your head, I was very, very distracted and really struggled at times to figure out how we got from point A to point B. So I definitely think, at least for Mistborn, I probably should do a re-listen, if not like an actual read-through at some point. Also, a slight bonus, because Jared had already read them and his comprehension skills are far superior to mine, I just asked him my questions and he answered them for me. So there are 2 strengths that stood out to me for the whole series. One of them was the character development. I will also say props to the narrator, who was Michael Kramer, because he actually changed the voices of some of the characters as they grew and developed, which is just something that my brain had never considered a possibility when listening to an audiobook, nor do I think I'd noticed it until this series. Again, comprehension skills, not the best. The second strength was how the questions were answered across the series. And I guess this is probably more directed towards Brandon Sanderson's writing style and his prose, and how he actually constructs a story, thinking about it from book 1 through to book 3. The way that he introduces new questions before having answers for other ones, and then answering questions from book 1 and book 3, like, it was so very masterfully crafted. It was one of the things that I noticed and appreciated the most. There are some things to be said, and I have already talked about this on this here channel, but there are things to be said about how the female characters are portrayed, and I guess this contention for this is something that I knew about before going into the series, but I wasn't entirely sure what it related to. And my interpretation of it is the fact that there is one female character who is one of the main characters who is a protagonist. The rest of the women in the series either are like conniving or rich and vapid and they have no real plot or substance. There's one other female character that I can think off the top of my head who is like a protagonist at some point, but I don't know, it just felt very male dominated, and it is a fantasy series and I'm aware of that. I also don't necessarily think it's a huge fault of the book either. And honestly, if I didn't know about everyone else's perception and worries about it, I probably wouldn't have noticed anything, because I've grown up reading fantasy series for such a long time that are just male dominated, and the female characters are there as either just a love interest or a siren or something like that. So yeah, I don't know if I would have noticed it if I wasn't made aware of it beforehand, but reading through it, knowing it, I was somewhat aware, but not a deal breaker. Like, I still enjoyed the series quite a lot. So that is the Mistborn series. I've finally done it. Everyone praise me. Then we took another left turn and we read Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devon Price. And by read, I once again mean we listened. I do want to preface this by saying that I did read this nearly 2 months ago, so once again we're digging into the archives to remember exactly my thoughts. I did have quite a few at the time when I read it, and I had grand plans to write a very prolific and eloquent summary of my thoughts. I didn't do it. We had a low power mode 3 months. I also listened to it in a very short amount of time, like 2 days, whilst playing Stardew Valley for many, many hours. So maybe my attention might have been a bit divided, but also my brain was just a bit fatigued. And this always happens to me when I read or listen to non-fiction books, is that I just fatigue towards the end and I don't care anymore. And that's not fault of the books, that's just fault of my brain and where the dopamine flows. Ironic. Unmasking Autism is a non-fiction book. It is written by Dr. Devon Price, who is a trans autistic psychologist. He was diagnosed later in life, and this story really outlines his experience of a late autism diagnosis, but also draws in a lot of other stories and experiences of people that he's worked with over the years and people who have maybe a bit of a different experience. This book really outlines the autistic perspective and experience of masking. Masking is essentially where people suppress their natural responses or interactions with things, which also includes like stimming behavior, language, how they interact with people, how they talk, how they look at people, all that jazz. And this is done with essentially the aim to better like suit or fit in with a neurotypical society. But this is also typically at the cost of their own mental health, and it can be really quite damaging to someone's self-perception and how they see themselves, and also how other people see them as well. This book provides quite a good insight into how the autistic perspective is in a world that is so heavily geared towards neurotypical people. And like I said, it includes experiences of Dr. Devon Price, but also experiences of people that he has worked with over the years to really, I guess, consider and think about the challenges that our world gives people throughout their everyday life, and oftentimes the things that are needed and not considered or not given to allow for autistic people to be able to exist in society. The part at the end that I also fatigued in was very much a me thing, because it really outlines like the systemic world things that would need to change and that can change, but I don't have a whole lot of direct influence or control over. There are things that I can do, and I'm aware of that, and I'm trying to do those things, but I just tend to feel really hopeless and in a bit of a rut when I ingest in a very quick span of time a lot of the things that are wrong with the world, and it makes me feel very overwhelmed. So that probably also contributed to my burnout, but this is a very good book to read if you are wanting to know a little bit more about the autistic perspective and to understand more about what autism is, what masking is, why people are diagnosed, when people are diagnosed, all that sort of stuff. There are also several helpful like therapy-based activities in the book as well that are helpful for anyone, just anyone, doesn't have to be someone who is autistic. It is with the aim to unmask and to get rid of some of those masking practices, but like, I think everyone would benefit from them. We then took yet another left turn. We went around a roundabout. We delved into the last books that I read in the last couple of months, excluding this month, and those are Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. In my most recent video, you would have seen that when I read Fourth Wing, it took over my life, and that was it. I was done. Once again, we listened to it. Fourth Wing and Iron Flame is basically the internet, the TikTok's beloved young adult / new adult fantasy romantic-y series. When it came out, I bought Fourth Wing and I didn't read it straight away. Iron Flame came out and I had grand plans of just not reading them until a few more of them were out. I'm both incredibly glad that I read them now, but also very devastated that I didn't stick to that plan, because now I have to wait, and I'm not okay with that. I strongly stand by a belief that this series is like this era, this generation's version of ACOTAR. Fourth Wing follows our main character, Violet Sorrengail. She is forced to attend a Dragon Rider Academy. She had not planned for this. She had planned to live her life in the scribe quadrant. She had planned to live her life in the scribe quadrant of this war college. However, her mother, being a dragon rider herself, basically said, no child of mine will not be a dragon rider, you will be a dragon rider. The fantasy world in which we are set, there is essentially a 500-year war that's been happening between the dragon riders and the griffin riders. The war colleges kind of prepare each of the different sides to, war against each other. Ongoing. There's 4 quadrants within the war college that Violet attends, and like I said, there's scribes, riders, there's the infantry, which is like your on foot soldiers, and then your healers, which heal people. Which the healers are needed because Dragon Riders Quadrant and just this academy in general are ruthless, which is made very clear because it's repeated many times with their cadets, basically. They have to go through these grueling and very dangerous training activities that essentially like weed out the weak so that the dragons can pick like the strongest people to ride them. And they end up losing like a third of their new recruits within like the first year. It's wild. Like I said, this book essentially killed my entire routine. I started off slow with Fourth Wing. It took me a hot minute to get into it, and then once I was into it, I think I listened to it. It was within 48 hours, like it was not a long amount of time. I had grand plans to finish listening to The Hero of Ages before jumping into Iron Flame because Jared had finished The Hero of Ages. I started listening to Fourth Wing to fill the gap between Mistborn. Big mistake, worst mistake, because I had to immediately read Iron Flame. Like there was no other choice, to the point where actually the stories kind of blend in my brain. Iron Flame is just a natural progression. We just continue the story. I'm not going to give you any other information from that because spoilers. Why did I like them so much? That is the question. Why do I like Fourth Wing and Iron Flame so much? And I think it is because I love dragons. I've always loved dragons. I've been a dragon kid since I was young, and the idea of a frail, chronic illness main character being both smart and also determined enough to enter and somewhat succeed in the Riders Quadrant really appeals to the underdog part of my heart. I'm also a huge sucker for an enemies to lovers romance, and I'm also a huge sucker for dragon politics. So if you like any of those things, you'll probably like Fourth Wing. If you don't know what Fourth Wing is at this point, or if you haven't read it, what rock are you living under? Also, part of me wishes that I never left that rock that you are currently in, if that's where you are. Moral of the story, there's a reason that I had a 6-week out from YouTube, and it all started here. Once I finished listening to Iron Flame, I had the immediate urge to go back and listen to Fourth Wing again. And I have not had that in a really, really long time. I think the last time I felt like I needed to immediately start a series again was when I read A Psalm for the Wild build. And that was in total 300 pages for a duology. And this is like, I don't have them in front of me, but I'm guessing like over 1600 pages of book to just jump straight back into, which I did. It wasn't entirely like, I'm just gonna read it again kind of thing. I did get Jared to start listening to it to see if he would like it, and he also loves it, which boy doesn't like reading, boy really loves Mistborn, boy also really loves Fourth Wing. I've now officially finished Fourth Wing twice in 1 year, twice in 2 months, which, you know, there's other things that I could have done with my time, but we've made our choices and here we are. I have rambled for far too long at you about the books that I've read. Thank you for sitting here and tolerating my rambles. Once again, not a professional book reviewer. Sometimes the words just don't make sense in the brain, and I'm just learning to sit with that and to accept. Let me know if you've read any of these books. That's all the books that I've read in the last couple of months. That's a lie. There's many books that I've read this month, and we'll get to that in a different video, but that is all I had for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a fantastic day or night or whatever time it is where you are in the world. And I, like with some certainty, I'm actually going to see you next week for a video, which is just wild for this schedule here. Wild. Goodbye.